A massive fire destroyed everything, all because of the irrational arrogance of a homeowner association. Karen, that's what happened to me. Can you imagine how horrifying it was? Before we begin, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. To purchase, the neighborhood we moved into was a serene place with large, lush green trees. I could feel the modernity mixed with the touch of classic elegance in the architecture of the houses. Emily and I were ecstatic, but everything quickly turned into a nightmare. On the very first day, while Emily and I were tidying up our front yard, a woman approached us. She appeared to be in her early 50s, with carefully styled blonde hair, bold red lipstick, and a heavily powdered face that still couldn't hide her rigid expression. She wore a striking red blazer and held a bundle of documents in her hand, as if she were about to sign some crucial contract. She stood at our gate, cleared her throat, and spoke in an authoritative tone. "Hello, I am the president of this neighborhood's homeowner association. I'm here to inform you that all residents are required to join the homeowner association. This is your registration form. Please sign it immediately." She extended the stack of papers toward me, the corner of her mouth lifting slightly as if she was certain I wouldn't refuse. I glanced at the documents and then looked straight into her eyes. Her gaze was sharp as a blade, radiating dominance and arrogance. I smiled politely but firmly. "Thank you, but I have no intention of joining the homeowner association." Karen's smile instantly vanished, replaced by an irritated frown. "You don't have a choice. Homeowner association rules are mandatory in this neighborhood. The previous owner must not have informed you about this, but if you refuse, life here will be very difficult for you." I crossed my arms over my chest, my voice still calm. I did thorough research before buying this house. Nowhere in the contract does it state that homeowner association membership is obligatory. I think I'll be fine without it." "Oh, so you actually bought this house?" Karen's surprise was evident, as if she couldn't believe someone like me could afford a home here. "That's right. This is my house, and I have no interest in joining your organization, ma'am," I replied calmly, unfazed by her condescending tone. Karen's face stiffened, her hands clenched so tightly that her nails pressed into her palms. She stared at me intently, as if trying to determine whether I was joking. Finally, she scoffed, snatched back the documents, and spun around to leave, but not before throwing out a final challenging remark. "You'll regret this decision." Emily and I exchanged glances without saying a word. But I knew we had just become a nuisance to Karen. Soon enough, she would do everything in her power to make me suffer. As expected, the following days turned into a constant onslaught from Karen. My inbox began filling up with emails from the homeowner association containing absurd reminders so ridiculous that I couldn't decide whether to be furious or to laugh. "Your grass is over 3 in long. Trim it immediately. Your trash bin is in the wrong position. Relocate it within 24 hours. Your car is parked incorrectly. It may be towed." I stared at the absurd words on my phone screen, feeling frustrated. Not only that, but every morning when I went outside to grab the newspaper, I found a warning letter shoved under my door. The letters were printed on thick, glossy paper with bold ink, as if to emphasize that the homeowner association was monitoring my every move. Karen was clearly trying to make my life miserable. I tried to ignore it, but the homeowner association wasn't about to ignore me. One day, I picked up a bulky envelope, opened it, and found a $500 fine notice stating violation, door color not in compliance with homeowner association regulations. Penalty $500 USD. I stared at the paper door color. Unbelievable. My door still had the original paint from when I bought the house. I hadn't changed anything. I let out a contemptuous laugh. Not only was this outrageous, but it was also an outright provocation. The homeowner association, more precisely, Karen, thought that if they kept pressuring me, I would surrender. Did they think I would be intimidated? That I would open my wallet and pay the fine like an obedient little sheep? Not a chance. I crumpled the paper and tossed it straight into the trash. But just then, Emily walked into the living room and saw my Tense expression. What's wrong, honey? I pointed at the pile of letters on the table, my voice full of irritation. Homeowner Association. They're at it again. Emily picked up one of the letters, read it, and sighed warily. Can they even do this? We never signed up for the homeowner association? I nodded, my fist clenching. Exactly. But she doesn't care. She just wants dominance. Emily looked at me, concern filling her eyes. I knew she didn't want us to get into a dispute with the homeowner association, but I also knew I couldn't let them push us around. A few days later, while I was watering the plants outside, a familiar figure appeared. Karen. She didn't bother knocking, she didn't wait for an invitation, she just walked straight into my yard, as if it were her own property. Today, she was dressed more extravagantly than usual, wearing a sleek black blazer, her high heels clicking against the pavement with an air of arrogance. But the most striking thing was her smile, more artificial than ever. Mr. Mark, she drawled, her voice smooth yet calculating. I think it's time you understand that no one can oppose the homeowner association. I took a deep breath to maintain my composure. Slowly I set the watering can down, wiped my hands on my pants, and met her gaze directly. I never signed up for the homeowner association. You have no right to impose this on me. Karen's smile remained, but I noticed a flicker of menace in her eyes for a split second. You don't understand. She shook her head with feigned regret. The homeowner association is the authority. If you don't comply, there will be repercussions. Her voice no longer bothered to hide the threat. I smirked coldly. I don't care. You should follow real laws rather than your ridiculous homeowner association rules. Karen's smile disappeared, her face turned red with rage, her hands clenched so tightly that her knuckles turned white. I could clearly see her jaw tighten, as if she was struggling to contain an explosive fury. She took a step forward, her eyes glaring at me as if she wanted to tear me apart right then and there. You will regret this decision. Her voice no longer held any politeness. It had become sharp and filled with resentment. I crossed my arms over my chest, looking at her without hesitation. I guess we'll just have to wait and see who regrets it first. Karen took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure, but I could see the anger boiling inside her. In the end, she turned her back and walked away. But before leaving, she cast one last defiant glance in my direction. Emily stepped out of the house, watching Karen's retreating figure before turning to me, her face full of concern. I don't like this at all, Mark, I sighed, pulling her into an embrace. Neither do I. But I won't let her intimidate us. Emily nodded, but I knew that both of us shared the same ominous feeling. Karen was not the type to give up easily, and the homeowner association nightmare was only just beginning. It was just another ordinary day. I was on my night shift at work preparing some documents when the phone suddenly rang. There was never anything good when the office phone rang. My colleague quickly answered it. I stood frozen for a moment when I heard where the fire had erupted. It was in my neighborhood. We hurriedly threw on our firefighting equipment and rushed to the truck. The alarm echoed through the silent night, ripping through the darkness. I gripped the steering wheel firmly, my heart racing as the fire truck sped through the streets. Fire waits for no one. It consumes everything in an instant. And right now, I was deeply worried about Emily. The fire was very near to my house. She must be horrified, especially since I wasn't home tonight. The flickering orange blaze in the distance signaled that the situation was dire. My team and I were entirely focused, ready to charge into battle against the inferno. But just a few hundred meters from the scene, figures suddenly dashed out into the road. Karen and she stood there in the middle of the street, raising both hands like a commander ordering a convoy to stop. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching loudly against the asphalt. The fire was only a few dozen houses away, yet Karen remained unmoving, her eyes burning with resentment. Stop! You are disrupting the peace of the neighborhood, she shouted, her voice filled with authority, as if she were the queen ruling over this place. I couldn't believe my ears. I rolled down the window, my face burning with frustration. Karen, we are responding to a fire. Get out of the way now. But she simply crossed her arms, smirking mockingly. What? Do you think I'm ignorant? There is no fire here. You're just using this as an excuse to ruin my homeowner association. My heart pounded furiously with frustration. Every passing second, the fire engulfed another part of the house. Even if she were blind, she should at least see a vague outline. I struggled to keep my voice steady, but my eyes blazed with rage. Karen, if you don't move aside, at best an entire house will be destroyed. At worst, someone could lose their life. But she remained stubbornly in place, her eyes gleaming with an insane level of defiance. It seemed as though she was intentionally ignoring my warning. And then she pulled something out of her pocket, a strip of sharp nails. Karen scattered them onto the road, the glistening nails rolling across the ground. I was appalled. Even the entire fire crew inside the truck couldn't believe what they were witnessing. One of my colleagues shouted in outrage, "What the hell are you doing?" Karen remained calm, a victorious smile on her face. "If you can't drive past, then you won't be able to interfere either." This was no longer just a simple disturbance. This was intentional sabotage, a crime. I immediately contacted the police. I was going to put an end to Karen's insanity. Within minutes, police sirens blared as a patrol car arrived. An officer stepped out, his face filled with fury. At the scene before him, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Karen looked slightly startled, but maintained her arrogant demeanor, flipping her hair conceitedly. "I'm just ensuring order in my neighborhood." The officer narrowed his eyes, his hands clenched into fists. "Do you realize you're blocking a fire truck? This is a criminal offense, Miss Karen." She remained unfazed and shrugged. "Don't make a big deal out of this, officer. Mark is just making an excuse to use the emergency vehicle to go home. Don't let him trick you." I nearly lost my mind at her insane and ridiculous reasoning. Her hatred for me had blinded her to the point of sheer madness. The fire raging in the distance made all of us even more tense and desperate. The officer had no time for Karen's deranged arguments. He stepped forward, pulled out his handcuffs, and Karen's face began to change. No, you can't do this. I'm the president of the homeowner association, and you just obstructed emergency services. You are under arrest immediately." She froze, her expression hardening as if she had just been gravely humiliated. But under the intense gaze of the officer, she realized this was no joke. Only after the road was cleared could the fire trucks finally proceed toward the burning house. But when I arrived, my heart sank. The house was nearly completely engulfed by the flames. We quickly got the fire under control. Fortunately, there were no fatalities, but the house and its belongings were almost completely ruined. The owner of the house collapsed on the grass, weeping. The police stepped forward and explained to them about the incident caused by Karen. The owner of the burned house looked up at the woman who had created the disaster, his eyes widening in disbelief. The man staggered forward, his face filled with distress as he grabbed Karen's arm. His eyes were red, his breath coming in broken gasps from the trauma. What have you done?" Karen, now completely pale, her lips quivering, stammered incoherently. "No, it can't be." Her son lunged forward, his eyes burning with fury. "You blocked the fire truck because of your ridiculous homeowner association rules. You destroyed my house just to impose your authority." She stepped back, her legs shaking as if they had lost all stability. I didn't know, but her excuse was worthless. Her son glared at her with deep bitterness. "You have wrecked everything." Karen burst into tears, her hands covering her face, her sobs filled with complete despair. But it was too late. A police officer stepped forward, pulling out a pair of handcuffs, his voice stern. "You are under arrest for obstructing emergency services and endangering the community." Karen shrieked, struggling. "No, I did nothing wrong. You halted the fire department, and as a result, your son's house burned to the ground." Karen froze. She looked up, her eyes hollow as if she had just realized the horrifying severity of her actions. Her hands quivered as she stared at the ruins before her. The reality hit her like a tidal wave, wiping away all her arrogance. For the first time, Karen felt insignificant and powerless. For the first time, she had lost command of the situation in the holding cell. Karen still tried to console herself with arrogance. She crossed her arms, lifted her chin, and declared to the officer, "I did nothing wrong. I was just enforcing homeowner association rules. This is all Mark's fault. He didn't explain properly. He never told me the burning house was my son's." She nearly screamed the last sentence At the officer's face, there was no remorse in her, only an attempt to transfer the blame onto me. The officer sighed. Then he slammed his hand on the table, bringing an abrupt halt to Karen's nonsense. Do you not realize how catastrophic your mistake was? The officer threw down a stack of photos and the damage report from the fire. Look, you destroyed everything your son owned, his house and all his possessions. He was fortunate to have escaped early. If he hadn't run fast enough today, your blind, foolish arrogance would have killed your own son. The officer's words struck Karen like a hammer, each word drilling into her dazed, ringing ears. Her face went rigid, her eyes becoming distant and unfocused. She was finally being consumed by her own remorse, unable to resist or argue anymore. Karen's actions had led to irreversible consequences, and even though her son did not file charges against her, the court still convicted her. She was sentenced to 1 year in prison for obstructing emergency personnel at the trial. She sobbed like a child and turned to look at me. Her eyes held a mix of guilt and resentment. I was certain that she was still fixated on the idea that everything was my fault. I did not return her gaze. She would have to suffer for her mistakes. Hopefully, this punishment would transform her. What do you think about this story? Let us know where you're reading from, and don't forget to follow us for more compelling stories.